plant. I'm originally from Massachusetts, but I've been living in Maine here for most of my adult life. Hi, I'm Larry Ross. I'm sitting in the Lindbergh Crate, which was a box that was in my backyard for years and years. A big part of my life, and I couldn't be more thrilled than to have it be here and be a big part of other people's lives now.
Give us a history of the crate.
Yeah, the crate, from my standpoint, was a lucky find in a newspaper. Charles Lindbergh flies to Paris and says to Calvin Coolidge, I want to keep going around the world. And Calvin Coolidge says, you're a national treasure. We want you to come home safe and sound. So he gets Admiral Burridge, gives him the task of bringing Charles Lindbergh home from Paris. Charles Lindbergh goes to England, where he visits the king. They dismantle his plane, and they put the fuselage inside of the box that we're sitting in right now. And then they put the wings in another box, loaded on board the USS Memphis, and they send him home. And Lindbergh comes home, and on the flight home, he really develops a very cordial relationship with Admiral Burridge. And Burridge asks him if he can have the crate as a souvenir. He brings it to his farm in New Hampshire, where he turns it into this guest house. Lindbergh was he was a very introverted man, and you don't see a lot of pictures of him where he's openly smiling. This, I tell kids, is the sweet smile of success. Lindbergh lands in Washington. They put the plane back together, and he immediately flies to St. Louis. He's standing next to Harold Bixby, who was the banker in St. Louis that Lindbergh went to with this idea to win this contest. It was a contest called the Ortega Prize. And Ortega was a hotel owner that wanted to stimulate traffic coming across the Atlantic. And so Lindbergh enters the contest with the idea that we're going to fly cross country. And he was he flew a mail plane in St. Louis. And he kind of envisioned that if aviation really takes off, St. Louis will be a hub. He envisioned kind of like how air transport hubs work today. So he goes to this Bixby and he says, I've got the wherewithal as a pilot, and I know what we want for a plane, but I don't have the money. And Bixby, who was a banker, said, I want to be on the team. I'll be the banker. But I love that photograph because here they are. They're both smiling. We did it. We did it. We had this crazy dream, and we made it happen. When I run into the guy that owns it has been offered $5,000 for the crate for somebody that can cut it up into pieces and sell it as little plaques. And I go down and I look at it, and I don't have $5,000, and I really didn't even have $3,000. And I said, well, I'm going to use it to teach kids a lesson about Charles Lindbergh. And this is what I think the lesson is. Have a vision of what you want to achieve. Make a plan of how you're going to do that. Form a team of dedicated people around you that will help you do that, and then you stay focused on that. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get it done. And that's, I believe, a kind of a formula that got Lindbergh to Paris. And the guy loved it. He said, I'm in. I'll sell it to you for $3,000. I'll help you get it out of the woods. This whole project is courtesy of America's schemers and dreamers. You got to have a dream. You got to have a scheme. You got to have people say, yeah, I'll buy in. I'll help you with that. So I got it. I brought it back to my home. Even the guy that moved it was just fantastic. I didn't know him. He ran a mobile home business. I went to him and I said, this looks like a manufactured home. Can you put this on a trailer for me? And he says, yeah. And I said, what's that going to cost? He said, we'll work that out. And there were a lot of people that said things like that to me. And what that meant was, I like what you're doing. I want to be a part of it. I'll help you out with this. So that was part of the story that I wanted to tell kids, but immediately that same thing started happening to me. I started sharing my dream with people. I started finding people that wanted to make it happen. I restored it. I wrote to Admiral Burridge's grandchildren. I write to Admiral Burridge's grandchildren, and this guy comes to meet me. He says, I want to come out and I want to see you. And he comes in, and I've just started to restore the crate. I'm just starting to do what I'm going to do. And I get him here and I tell him, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And all of a sudden he looks around and he says, you have this up backwards. There was a big porch on this back side that I never even knew about. I had only seen one photograph, just a photograph of the front of the house, as he had it, as the Admiral had. And he said, oh, this is what the back of it looked like. And all of a sudden it was like ka-ching, ka-ching, like, whoa, big veranda off the back. Well, a week later, I get a letter from him, and he sent me a check that says, I knew that was a surprise to you, and I appreciate that you want to do it the same way that grandfather wanted to do it, and I want to help out with that. But in addition to that, he gave me all of his memorabilia from his grandfather. There's a picture hanging on the wall behind you that his grandfather painted. I have things that I said, you don't want this in your family. And he said, it means nothing to anybody in the family. We want it to mean something to you. So that just kept building and building and building. And in here, everything in here is something that someone has either helped me with or participated in with me. And so this set of pictures is the crate coming into Maine on back of the modular home. And I made that up for this guy that I didn't even know. But I wanted him to have it because it was a great part of the story that he'd been part of. And that led me to become friends with him and to become friends with his wife. Well, all of a sudden, some years later, his wife shows up and she says, I want you to have this picture of my grandfather. This is a picture of my grandfather, and he ran this group called the Lindbergh class. And evidently, she's telling me it was a group of men that formed these little groups where they tried to use Lindbergh's story to teach kids what they should be like. And I went over, and they're not here, but I went over and I had all these binders filled with letters that the crate had been in the Smithsonian magazine one year, and that got me all kinds of letters from all across the country. And I went over, I said, look at this. And I open up and I take out this letter, and there's a letter in there from a guy that said, when I was a kid, there was a man in my town that ran this Lindbergh class, and this is the influence he had on me, and this is the influence he had on all these other people, and he's telling the story. And it's her grandfather that the guy is telling the story about. And I go to her and I say, look at this. Look at this. And this place is filled with things like that. I wrote to Jim Lovell the astronaut. Jim Lovell, when they went to the moon for Apollo 8, they didn't land, but they went to the moon and they circled the moon and they came back. Charles Lindbergh had breakfast with them or lunch with them the day before they took off and said, this is the big one. If we can get there and get back, that's what matters. We'll figure out how to land, but if we can get there and get back, this is what matters. And then Lovell goes to the moon again with Apollo 13. They have the catastrophe, but think can do. They figure out when things don't go according to plan, how to get him to the moon and get him to the back. And Jim Lovell writes to me, and it's one of my favorite letters because he writes to me and he says, hey, Mr. Ross, it's nice that you're trying to do this, but I don't get it. The crate had nothing to do with getting Lindbergh to Paris. Just let it go. And I said, I get that. But what the crate does have is it catches people's attention. And then when you catch people's attention, you have an opportunity for something else to happen. And when you have that opportunity, maybe something else will come your way and you'll learn something from that. And I said, it's going to do what it always did. It just held something. And now what it's going to hold is all these stories and all these connections. And people want to connect. They want to connect with each other.